Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings NBA video for Tuesday, March 8th. I know a lot of you guys are reeling last night after having some rosters that scored 320, 330, 340 and still didn't cash. But I just wanted to take a minute before we get started today to kind of explain to you guys that this is something that we see happen at the end of every NBA DFS season. And I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of the reasoning behind why it does happen, so you don't get discouraged, because nights like this are going to happen. I myself put up a 340 last night, and I don't think I cashed in any 50-50s, any double ups, and I wasn't even near the money in most of the tournaments that I played in. I know many of you probably had the same feeling last night, because of everything that happened and the late news, and that's really what it comes down to. Remember, when these sites put out the pricing, they don't know that at 6:15 the Memphis Grizzlies are going to decide to sit their entire starting five. But what we do know is when information like that does come out, it opens up a lot of minutes and usage for other guys that you have to use. It happened on Saturday with the Nets when they decided to sit Brook Lopez and Thad Young. Willie Green and Thomas Robinson were on every winning roster. It happened last night with the Memphis Grizzlies where you wind up getting Mario Chalmers and JaMychal Green. Lance Stevenson had a good game. Tony Allen had a good game. All these guys wound up returning 7, 8, 9, 10x value at basically like minimum prices, 4,500 or below. Now, what I kind of wanted to talk about with you guys is when you see that stuff happen, these guys are going to be incredibly highly owned, and you also know that you have to have them in your lineups in order to win. So if you went out there and kept in, all the guys that we talked about in the video yesterday, who all did pretty well. I mean, Giannis was between 5 and 6x, which is normally something we would love on any night. You got 6x out of Drew Holiday. You got 5.6x out of Nick Batum. So you got good returns out of these guys between 5 and 6x. But on a night where there's 3 or 4 guys in a lineup that are going to go 7 or 8x, and these are the chalk players, you kind of have to go away from some of the chalk. And let me kind of explain why to you. Again, if you look at your game logs from last night, which is why I wanted to do this today, so it was still fresh in everyone's head. If you go look at your game logs from last night, you're going to see the guys like Chalmers were 70, 80% owned, depending on where you were playing. JaMychal Green, 50, 60% owned. Tony Allen, 30, 40% owned. Lance Stevenson was like 20, 30% owned. Not incredibly high, but still pretty high up. So if you look at some of the other guys, with those guys being so cheap, you got higher ownership rates than you probably normally would have seen on a night on guys like DeMarcus Cousins and Steph Curry, because you could fit all those guys into your lineups if you went up and paid for it. I mean, I think Giannis was like 63 or 64% last night. So the little tip I want to give out to everybody today is when you have that much value that opens up, you want to make sure that you kind of diversify, diversify which big price stars that you pay up for. Everybody was looking to pay up for a guy like DeMarcus Cousins yesterday, but if you would have went with Pau Gasol or even a Karl Anthony Towns, you could have still got 65 or 70 points out of them. Plus, you would have given yourself enough money where, you could have spent up for maybe both of those guys on a roster, as opposed to taking, Cousins and then having to come down and try to find the guy in the 5 or 6K price range. So when we do have a lot of this value open up, you want to take that value, you want to lock it in, because you can't win without it. As we saw last night, if you didn't have JaMychal Green on Saturday, if you didn't have Thomas Robinson or Willie Green, you probably didn't make it to the top of of the leaderboard. So where you really want to look for diversification on nights like that is with the stars that you take. And remember, yes, we all know DeMarcus Cousins is a great player, and we all know that Steph Curry is a great player, but they're not the only 2 great players in the league. There are other guys. So you want to try to get some of those other guys that people aren't talking about in there, especially at this point of the season where, you kind of got rid of a lot of the people who aren't really good NBA DFS players. Basically, you only have the guys who really like the NBA and really like, NBA DFS that are still playing. So when you hear about this news at 6 o'clock or 6:15, where there's plenty of time for people to change their rosters around, just about everybody sitting at the computer is doing the same thing that you're doing. They're changing around their roster, they're putting these cheap guys in, and then they're figuring out which studs they can put in there. So if you just go and put in the guys who are the likeliest high-owned studs on the day, you're going to wind up doing exactly what happened last night. We're going to wind up with rosters in the 330 to 340 area that wind up not even cashing in 50-50s and double ups because everybody in the world has the exact same guys in their team that we do. So that's just my quick public service announcement for today. We're going to get into what you guys always come here to see, and that's going to be some of the guys who we're looking at to target tonight. It's only a 6-game slate, and it's kind of an ugly one. We got a couple games that could turn into blowouts with, double-digit spreads. We got a couple games that are, low totals under 200. We got a couple games that don't even have a total yet, which makes absolutely no sense to me because I'm not really sure what news they're waiting on in some of these games. But the three guys I want to talk about today are Carmelo Anthony, Aaron Gordon, and Robin Lopez. And all three of them are getting a bump up or may wind up getting a bump down at the end of the day based on some injury news that we don't have here. And like I said, it's kind of an ugly slate. I mean, the only two games that really look like decent ones to target where we get high totals and low spreads are the Orlando and LA Lakers game and maybe the Washington and Portland game. But remember, we have hit that point in the season where, you put your lineups together at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. By 6:15, 6:30, you could be completely blowing it up and starting all over again. So don't fall too much in love with anybody, but keep some of these guys in mind that we're going to talk about here. First guy I want to talk about is Carmelo at 8,400. He's in a paced-up game versus Denver. A little bit of a revenge game here for Melo. With Porzingis out recently, Melo has been seeing about 40-plus minutes, which is what I really like about Carmelo here today. He's played 40-plus minutes, I think, in 3 of the last 4 games that they've gone out there and played. He's healthy this year, so he's getting big minutes. And while he's out there on the floor, he's racking up fantasy stats. He has 40-plus fantasy points in 9 of his last 10 games. Hit a ceiling game of 57, has a couple other games of 50 in there. And remember, at a price of only 8,400, you're basically looking at like a 42-point floor for him for 5X in tournaments and a 49, 50-point floor ceiling for 6X when you look for him in a 42-point floor for 5X in cash, a 50-point floor for a 50-point ceiling for 6X in tournaments. There you go, as a tongue twister. But anyway, he's put up 40-plus fantasy points in 9 of the last 10, so he's been a pretty safe, solid cash game play for you. And in 6 of those games, he's actually put up double-doubles, which is something we haven't seen too much from Melo in recent years. His rebounding numbers are definitely up. He hasn't had less than 7 boards in any one of those last 10 games. But the thing that I like is he's also picked up his assist numbers. He hasn't had less than 4 assists in 9 of those 10 games. But I mean, he's given you a bunch of games where he's got 5, 6 assists. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but when you look at a Carmelo Anthony stat line, if he goes for 23 to 25 points, he adds in 10 rebounds plus 6 assists and a steal or a block. That's how you get him the 50 fantasy points and get the 6X value and more that you need. So if Porzingis is out, I absolutely love him. Even with Porzingis in, I still think he's good for 40 to 48 fantasy points, somewhere right in that 5.5 to 6X range. And I think he's still going to be one of the more solid plays in the day. Remember, Denver's the team that plays fast. They have trouble guarding, basically everybody at every position this year. So I think Melo against Denver is in a pretty good spot here on a day where there aren't too many games that I want to target. One of the games that I do want to target is going to be that Orlando versus the LA Lakers game. And I think one of the guys who's the best price in this game is Aaron Gordon at 6,700. Like I said, this is one of the best games to target on what's a pretty weak slate as far as, the Vegas lines go and pointing out places that we should be looking to get some exposure. The Lakers do struggle to stop big men, so I think that Aaron Gordon's in a pretty good spot. And he had a monster game last out with Vucevic out on an injury. I don't know if Vucevic is going to be out here again, but if Vucevic is out, we should see a monster rebounding game from Aaron Gordon, and including a few more minutes. Now, even with Vucevic in, we have seen his minutes tick up to the 33 to 36-minute range. And recently, he had only been playing like 27 to 30. So if you're getting an extra 10 to 20% of, court time out of Aaron Gordon, well, that takes his 32, 33-point games that he's been putting up and brings him up into like the 37 to 40 range. And 37 to 40 is exactly what we need to pay off a salary of 6,700, to give us that 6X upside and to make us feel safe of a floor of like 33, which is, the 5X value we would need there. He has huge double-double upside. He's got a whole bunch of them. He had a string of like 6 or 7 games in a row with double-digit rebounds. A couple of them he didn't have the scoring. He has picked up his scoring lately. His rebounding numbers are still up. Had a big double-double in the last game. It was, 20-something points and 16 rebounds. So, like I said, Aaron Gordon at 6,700 is one of the guys who I think is reasonably priced here. I really want to have more exposure to this game, but I don't love the prices of some of these guys. On DraftKings, you got D'Angelo Russell's up to almost 7K right now. Jordan Clarkson at 6K is kind of right on the border of me considering him. On the other side of this game, Oladipo's a solid play, but you got his price up above 7K now. You got Fournier's price up almost at 6K right now. One of the unintended consequences of DraftKings moving up the value of guys who start playing well so fast is it kind of has gotten to the point now with these guys that are, being substituted in coming out, that the stars and scrubs lineup is really the way you want to go. I mean, you get a 60, 70-point game out of a James Harden or the Marcus Cousins, and you can find 4 or 5 guys now in the 3,500 to 4,500 range because of, late injury news that, some of these guys in the mid-range, it no longer makes sense for you to use them. Remember, late in the season, too, it's also a lot tougher to be in cash games because the ecosystem's not as robust. You don't have as many people in there. So when you do see these stars and scrubs kind of situations pop up, some of these guys in the mid 6 to 7K range who, have come up quickly off of their low prices because they've been producing, they're no longer guys that can produce anymore. It's not that I don't think D'Angelo Russell's still a good play today. I just don't think that there's a ton of upside left for him at 69. Aaron Gordon at 67 is somebody who is in that boat in other matchups. But if Vucevic is out against the Lakers in a high total game, I still think he's somebody that can get me that 6X and does have the opportunity to get me 7 or 8X if he has a really big game. Next guy I want to talk about is Robin Lopez, who's one of those players that is still in a pretty nice sweet spot below that 6K range. He's got a good matchup versus a weak interior defense for the Nuggets. He's been playing big minutes with Porzingis banged up and out. And the last 6 games where he's seen 31-plus minutes, he has yielded 43, 52, 51, 41, 32, and 35 fantasy points. So if Porzingis is missed, or even if Porzingis plays, we've seen his minutes get drastically scaled back. I think Robin Lopez becomes a great play. Basically what happens when Porzingis is out, Melo kind of slides over to the power forward spot. They start putting guys like maybe a Lance Thomas or Derek Williams in there at the small forward spot. But what it also does is a lot of times when Melo was sliding to the power forward slot, they were sliding Melo to the power forward slot, sliding Porzingis over to the center slot, and Robin Lopez, even though they gave him a big contract, was finding himself on the bench. With Kristaps out now, Melo slides to power forward, Lopez slides to play center. He gets big minutes. He gets big minutes besides, Carmelo Anthony, and the two of them have both been producing some pretty good numbers. So I'm hoping Porzingis is out tonight. If he is, I'm going to have a lot of shares of Robin Lopez and Carmelo Anthony, unless we get some crazy news like we got last night at 6:15 or 6:30 where, 4 or 5 starters on a team are out. They're only playing 8 guys, and each one of those 8 guys is, 4,500 or less, where you just can't pass up the value. Even in that situation, though, if Kristaps is out, I still think I'm going to try to fit Robin Lopez in because 43, 52, 51, 41, 32, 30, 35 for only 5,800 basically means that he's given you 6X in 5 of the last 6 games that he's played without, where he's played over 31 minutes. Most of the time that happens when Porzingis doesn't play. And even the bad game that he had over those last 6 has been 32, where he's seen over 31 minutes. So I think you can definitely get some good production out of Robin Lopez here. I think you can get it at a cheap price, which is something that's at a premium today. And I do like that New York Knicks and Denver game more than I think, a lot of other people do. I think that's one of the 3 games, along with the Lakers game against Orlando and the Washington game against Portland, that I'm going to be looking to have some exposure to today because I do think you're going to get some big fantasy scores out of there. So remember, what happened last night is something that we are going to see a little more often going through to the end of the season here. It tends to happen at the end of every NBA season where, teams start sitting guys. We start getting some of those, $3,000 and $4,000 flyers that put up 30 and 40 points because they're playing 35 to 40 minutes when they usually play, 12 to 18. So you got to be here at lineup lock. If you're going to play NBA DFS for the next month or so, you got to make sure you're sitting at your computer between 6:30 and 7 o'clock. Otherwise, to be perfectly honest with you, you're just going to be donating money. You could have had what you thought was the absolute nut lineup like I did at 6 o'clock yesterday. But once all that news came out and everything changed, if you didn't have the time to make those changes and, upgrade your team, you weren't going to get to the 370, 380, 400 mark that we saw some people hit yesterday. Yeah, 400 people hit yesterday on DraftKings. So, if you're wondering why you didn't cash with 320 or 340, if you didn't have over 300 last night, you were probably in the bottom 20% of all lineups that were made. So don't get discouraged. Like I said, it's one of those things that was just a freak occurrence. There were a lot of really high-owned players, and all those high-owned players kind of went off. There were a lot of superstars that went off last night. You got 65, 70 fantasy points at a, Towns and at a Pau Gasol and out of, DeMarcus Cousins, and you got 50-something at a Kemba Walker. I mean, there were just so many guys who put up such big numbers last night. Even guys that were highly owned, like Drew Holiday, put up a 6x performance. So like we said, it's one of those things. It happens. Don't get discouraged. It is something that you have to be mindful of going forward here for the end of the year. But again, NBA DFS is still a game where it comes down to, minutes equaling money and, getting a good price on these guys and making sure you're getting 6 or 7x value out of everybody on your roster. And yes, I did say 6 to 7x at this point in the season. It's no longer a 5x floor, 6x ceiling is what you're shooting for. 300 points hasn't been enough to win any GPPs on DraftKings in the last week or two. So you have to be willing to adjust your style of play. You got to look for some more upside out of guys. You got to be a little bit more, you got to be able to say no a little bit more to some of these guys who you don't think can get you at least a minimum of 6x for a tournament. And again, you should also be changing up your mix of how you're playing. Late in the season right now, I don't play as many, after March 1st, basically, I don't play as much in cash games as I normally do. I'm still playing in some of these tournaments. I'm still trying to build some, tournament winning teams. But I used to play probably 75-25 between cash and GPP. Right now, I'm probably playing, I would say the predominant amount of my money in GPPs. I don't go into, too many of the head-to-heads, the 50-50s, and the double-ups anymore like I did at the beginning of the season. I just don't think you have as much of an edge here right now. It's a lot of sharp players that are still left playing, and there's a lot of late news that are changing everything around. So just keep that in mind. Thank you for joining us here at rotocurve.com for our DraftKings NBA picks for Tuesday, March 8th. And as always, stay classy, DFS.